St. John Bosco warned the King of Italy, Victor Emmanuel II, that if he signed a certain bill, evils upon evils would fall upon his house. Nevertheless, he did sign off on the 1855 monastic suppression laws, which allowed the confiscation of church property in Italy and closed many a convent and monastery. Now, we've already heard of Don Bosco's prophecy of doom for the king's house earlier on the channel, and if you'd like to see a playlist of our 3-part series, just click on the link above me here. But today, I'm going to tell you of the chilling fulfillment of this prophecy after the king entertained the idea of signing this anti-Catholic bill. The Miracles and Prophecies of St. John Bosco, a project of America Needs Fatima. I'm your host, Matthew Miller. Subscribe for new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. The bill proposing the stealing of ecclesiastical property had not yet been discussed in the Chamber of Deputies. However, it had already been addressed in 2 sittings in 1854 and 1855. The Archbishop of Genoa and the bishops of Annecy and Maurienne had gone to Rome because the ministry had strongly urged them to find ways to convince the Holy See to give ecclesiastical property to the state. This was all a sham. The Masons desired to trample the church's rights at all costs. The Holy Father was willing to aid Piedmont's finances, and he was imposing very reasonable conditions on this concession. The government, however, had sent a copy of the bill to Rome, which ended all negotiations. In the meantime, petitions were coming in from all quarters to Parliament for it to reject the bill. 2 respectful but forceful letters from the episcopate of the kingdom were presented to the houses. Catholics who could influence public affairs were preparing for the fight. Occasionally, in the evenings, characters among the most distinguished of Turin would go to the ecclesiastical boarding school, which Don Bosco had attended, and hold conferences with none other than St. Joseph Cafasso, who Don Bosco also knew. They had gone to him to firm up their convictions, arm themselves with courage, and receive an exact argument to avoid pitfalls and deception from his brilliant mind. Don Cafasso knew how to advise them very well what to do, and to all he recommended union, obedience, respect for the Pope, and firmness in fulfilling the duties of good Christians. They were all friends of Don Bosco. Among them was Marquis Fossati, who knew what Don Bosco was doing for the cause and was undoubtedly in complete agreement with Don Cafasso. Meanwhile, in the Chamber of Deputies on January 9, 1855, a discussion was taking place on the forfeiture of ecclesiastical property, and these absolute insanities were spewed from the mouths of liberals. Civil power has a right to appropriate ecclesiastical property when it's no longer used. The church has no right to own anything. The poor have the right to the property of the church, and when a nation is poor, church property needs to be confiscated. Religious communities must recognize civil authority solely from the country to which they belong. The Earl of Margaret eloquently refuted all of that nonsense with courage, and wasn't afraid to qualify Ratazzi's proposal as sacrilegious robbery, and concluded his speech by foretelling trouble for Piedmont if the law was passed. Other deputies and Catholic journalists valiantly fought the bill as well. Such was the state of affairs when a painful event interrupted the discussion. On January 5, 1855, Queen Mother Maria Teresa suddenly fell ill, and though she suffered a great thirst during the night, she didn't drink to be able to receive Holy Communion on Epiphany. King Victor Emmanuel wrote, "My mother and wife keep telling me that they are dying of stress on my account." In alignment with Don Bosco's prophecy, the Queen Mother died on January 12, 1855 in the afternoon at the age of 54. The chamber suspended its work to mourn with the king. The loss of Maria Teresa was a great misfortune for Piedmont, as she was very generous with the poor. As the coffin was yet closing, a mysterious letter came to the king, which said, without naming anyone, "A person enlightened from on high warns, beware. There has already been one death. If the law is passed, other misfortunes will befall your family. And this is just the beginning. Erunt mala super mala in domo tua. evils upon evils will fall upon your house. If you do not turn back, you will be opening a bottomless abyss." The king was dumbfounded. His peace of mind was overcome by a sense of terror. Enrico Tavalini corroborates this fact when he wrote that the king was threatened with divine punishment by numerous letters from prelates. Maria Teresa's solemn funeral was held on the morning of January 16, 1855. The body was transported to Superga in frigid weather that made many soldiers ill. 4 days prior to the Queen Mother's death, Queen Maria Adelaide had happily given birth to a son, but soon complications endangered her life. Her sorrow from the loss of her mother further aggravated her condition and made it critical. At about 3 o'clock in the afternoon of January 16th, Holy Viaticum was brought to her from the Royal Chapel of the Holy Shroud while people flocked to church to pray for her recovery. Immense crowds gathered in all the churches for the restoration of her health. The whole of Piedmont heartily associated itself with the sorrows of the royal family, verifying the ancient maxim that in Piedmont, the king's misfortunes are the people's misfortunes. On January 20th, 1855, extreme unction was administered to the queen, and about noon she entered her final agony. In the evening, about 6 o'clock, she expired at only 33 years of age. The mourning of the House of Savoy did not end there. On the same evening, Holy Viaticum was given to His Royal Highness Ferdinand, Duke of Genoa, already worn out from health problems. The only brother of King Victor Emmanuel, plunged into the most agonizing illness. 3 weeks later, in February, he too would die. Maria Adelaide's funeral was held on January 24, 1855, and the body was buried in Superga. The clerics of the oratory were stunned to see Don Bosco's prophecies fulfilled in such a lightning-fast manner, and were all the more impressed since they attended both funerals. For the oratory, this was all a great misfortune, and the clerics were saying to Don Bosco, "Your prophecies have come true. They were indeed great funerals, as the court valet announced to you." "It is true," Don Bosco replied. "God's judgments are indeed inscrutable, and we do not know if divine justice will be paid with merely these 2 deaths." Don Bosco likely knew much more than he had manifested. Countess Felicita Cravosio and Fossi sent the Salesians the following testimony that she signed. "It was the year 1854, and I begged Don Bosco to accept a foster brother of my son into the oratory, who had lost both his mother and his father. He accepted him with the condition that I should present myself to the Queen Mother and her daughter and ask for a donation of 2,000 lire that Don Bosco needed to pay for an urgent debt. I promised and was resolved to fulfill my promise, but then difficulties arose that caused me to postpone my visit to these august ladies, who, in the meantime, had moved away from Turin and were living in the villa of Count Case of Casaletti. Having gone to the country for some rest, I returned to the city before autumn and went to see Don Bosco, who immediately said to me, 'I accepted the foster son of your brother, but you didn't keep your promise. You didn't speak to the queens of my debt to the baker.' 'This is true,' I replied, 'but rest assured that as soon as the queens are back in Turin, I won't fail to fulfill my promise.' While I was speaking, Don Bosco shook his head, indicating disbelief, and with a somewhat sad smile he said to me, 'So many things can happen in between now and then that you may never speak to the queens again.' The Countess asked, 'Why are you telling me this?' 'Because that's the way it is. You'll never see the 2 queens again.' After a fortnight, I was staying in a noble's house, and I learned of the return of the queens to Turin, and that Queen Maria Teresa was very ill and had received the sacraments. We soon got the news of her death. 8 days later, the young Queen Maria Adelaide died, and both were mourned and venerated as 2 holy queens. Then I remembered the words of the servant of God and saw his prophetic spirit clearly. Meanwhile, Pius IX made a declaration on January 22, 1855. He showed how much he had done to alleviate the ills of the church in Piedmont and set forth the many decrees by which that government was harassing the one true faith. This evil decree proved how the new law of forfeiture was utterly repugnant to natural, divine, and social law, and how it opened the way to the most pernicious errors of socialism and communism. Pius IX then affirmed the curse that would fall upon the advocates of that immoral law and anyone who stole ecclesiastical property. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you'd like to see the other parts of this story, just click on the link above me here. God bless you, and Our Lady keep you.